and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. The government today has unveiled a comprehensive reform package for banks. The Minister of State for Finance has called it the most comprehensive reform package for banks since the bank nationalization era. Is it really that? We will talk to the man himself. Mr. Sinha, I appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. I know that you've been hard at work on this, putting together this reform package together for the last 9 months. What have been the constraints? Because while the feedback has been positive, people appreciate what the government is attempting to do as far as the banking sector is concerned. Capital infusion much needed, and there is appreciation of the fact that you've actually this time put your money where your mouth is when it comes to capital infusion. But in general, the perception seems to be that it's short of, as you've called it, the most comprehensive reform package for banks since nationalization. If I could quote you what Leo Puri has said, he says it's purposeful incrementalism. How would you respond to that?
Good evening, Shereen. Glad to be with you this evening and happy to answer whatever questions you might have, including a question from my good friend Leo about whether this is Big Bang or incrementalism. You know, at some stage we have to get past the labels. We should not get tied in with one definition or another definition. We really have to see, have we put in place the mechanisms and the approach to really ensure that our public sector banks, which are the core of our financial system, are well prepared for the future, that they are strong, that they are highly capable of dealing with the challenges that the future will bring, and that they are on a pathway to really being very effective global competitors. Those are the questions we should really ask ourselves. If we ask ourselves those questions, it's very important, I think, to ensure that we equip them with the tools and resources they need to be able to compete in the future. Now, whether you want to call that incrementalism or Big Bang, I think we'll have to wait and see.
So let me talk to you in terms of specifics. I guess some of that perception is on account of what people were anticipating the government would announce is divestment, bringing down government holding, where you actually have in principle approval from the cabinet to bring down government holding to 52%. Of course, not majority. Majority will continue to be with the government. Why the decision to not do that? How soon do we anticipate that? Does that strategic decision still stand today? And is it now a question really of sort of prepping banks for better valuation in that sense as far as your stake sale is concerned? What is the thinking as far as bringing down the government's holding in PSBs is concerned?
Well, you asked earlier, Shereen, this question about what the constraints are. And today, if we have to think about the constraints that the banks have, first and foremost is the Banking Nationalization Act of 1969, which ensures that the government controls these public sector banks, which means that our holding has to be 51, 52% or higher. So that is definitely an important constraint. Of course, another constraint is the NPA situation that the banks are dealing with right now. So whatever solution we come up with, whatever process we come up with, has to take into account these two very important constraints. So what our thinking is right now is that we have to provide, as I said earlier, the tools and resources for the banks so that they can deal with the important challenges of the future, that they stay within the constraints that we have right now. To overcome the 52% hurdle that we have right now would require legislative action. Okay. And of course, as you know, Parliament has not been an easy place to do business.
Forget crossing the legislative hurdle and bringing down your stake below 52%. But are we to understand that at least in the interim, which is FY17, perhaps even FY18, the government does not intend to bring its shareholding down to perhaps 52% or anywhere close to 52%?
I think that is a decision that individual banks are going to have to take. I mean, every bank needs to decide for itself what is the best way for it to position itself for the future. We know that there are big changes coming, right? We've got the payment banks coming in, we've got the small banks coming in, technology is moving very quickly, the private sector banks are very competitive, they're very well positioned, the foreign banks are converting in some cases to being subsidiaries, we have NBFCs that have been taking share away from banks. So the entire competitive landscape is changing very quickly. It's important for the banks, therefore, as they think through the competitive landscape, to understand whether they are well positioned and whether they have the balance sheet, the talent, the systems to be able to compete. Now, each individual bank needs to figure out when it's going to raise capital, what it needs to do as far as its strategies are concerned, and what it needs to do as far as mergers and consolidation is concerned.
You know, since you talked about mergers and consolidation, and I'll get to that in just a bit, but since we were talking about bringing down the government holding in banks, and Indra Dhanush, that you've unveiled today also to a large extent has to do with improving corporate governance as far as the banking system is concerned. Wouldn't bringing down government shareholding automatically enhance corporate governance when you actually have a diverse set of shareholders?
No, I don't agree with that, Shereen. The fact of the matter is that we can improve, and we are improving corporate governance in each of these banks right now. We are applying the best practices, many of which are embodied in various listing agreements and the Companies Act. In any case, so we are very much taking that on board, and we are trying to ensure that our banks are absolutely world-class when it comes to corporate governance and in terms of executive talent. And so once we have given them those resources, once we've told them very clearly that they are in control of their own destinies, and our role is to be that of the custodian and the stewards of the people's wealth as the principal shareholder, then we need the banks to step up and take the initiative and decide for themselves how they are going to be viable and successful competitors in the future. So I think a little bit of this excitement in the market that there's going to be some big top-down announcement perhaps is not the right way to think about this sector. Again, as I said earlier, this is a comprehensive framework for bottoms-up transformation. It's not meant to be some big bang top-down announcement by the government. The role of government is that of facilitator, to be an enabler. And so we've tried to put in place the facilitating, enabling environment that will enable these banks to decide for themselves what is the best way that they can really compete and succeed in the future.
Since you're speaking of facilitation, an institutional mechanism that you're now putting in place to sort of enable facilitation between the government and the banks is the bureau, the Bank Bureau, and that is being seen very positively by most people who are looking at this sector at this point in time. Why the decision to wait till April for it to be operational?
It's simply a question of ensuring that we have the right people in place. Leo talked about incrementalism. The fact that we are taking these very important functions that existed within DFS and we are moving them to the Bank Bureau, that is in the selection process of the chairman, of the MDs, of the directors of these banks, we are moving that to the Bank Bureau, that we are asking the Bank Bureau to really work closely with the banks to decide what their strategy should be, what their capital raising plan should be, and then, as the Honorable Finance Minister said, to ensure that the Bank Bureau itself becomes the precursor to the bank investment company. I mean, again, as I said, the idea of whether it is bold or incremental is in the eye of the beholder. From my perspective, the fact that we've given these banks so much operating autonomy which has never existed before, that we've unleashed them, we have unleashed them to be able to pursue their own destinies, that we have taken the powers that existed in the Ministry of Finance and transferred them to the Bank Bureau, where we are going to have eminent professionals, experts working with these banks. I think these are all, fairly important and significant.
Do you require any legislative action at all as far as the Bank Bureau is concerned?
Not at all. Not at all.
Let me talk to you about the composition as far as the Bank Bureau is concerned, and also the effort in trying to bring in private sector talent into the public sector banking pool. Have you seen enough interest coming in from the private sector? You've been able to only draw in 2 as far as this particular set of announcements is concerned, and do you believe that you will be able to draw in private sector talent?
We have been able to draw in very good private sector talent. Mr. Ravi Venkateshan, Mr. Jaykumar and others are, I think, are world-class, really outstanding and very, very capable people by any yardstick. And of course, when we were going through the selection process, we had a roster of very good candidates, both from the public sector as well as from the private sector.
How many people from the private sector?
Well, of course, that's part of the selection process, so I can't reveal that necessarily. But the fact of the matter is, we think we picked very good candidates from the private sector, and the fact that we put in place this comprehensive framework, we brought in private sector talent, I think will be a really important signal to other great people that want to be part of this very important and exciting nation-building task that our public sector banks are engaged in, and therefore, we are very hopeful as the process unfolds that we'll have other really, really good people coming in and being part of the public sector.
By when do you see or anticipate that the bank board will transition or pivot itself into the whole holding company?
Yeah, we've given ourselves some time to launch the bank board itself, April 1, 2016, simply because we have to get really, really capable, world-class people, ensure that they are on board, go through the selection and vetting process that has to happen in government, and so on. So I think we've given ourselves, sufficient time to be able to bring on board the best people. Now, once we have the best people, we see how the people that are on the bank bureau are working with the individual banks. We see where we are with the banks themselves in terms of, how close is their shareholding getting to that 52% factor. Once we take into all of that into account, then we'll know what is the appropriate timing for the bank investment.
So would you say that it's a 3-year roadmap, perhaps a 2 to 3 year roadmap? Would that be a safe assumption?
We'll have to see. I mean, again, there's nothing holding us back. We just need to ensure that all of this can work together flawlessly, and that the banks themselves are supportive and fully behind as far as this process is concerned.
I want to pick up on the point that you mentioned earlier, and that is consolidation. And we've heard a lot of people within government talk about the possibility of consolidation. Yesterday, the Finance Secretary, in his conversation with me as well, spoke about the need for consolidation. Mr. Chidambaram, in his times, he talked about the need for world-class and world-size Indian banks. What is the reality as far as consolidation is concerned at this point in time? Everyone's talking about it, but what is the way forward?
I think that you have to ask the banks themselves. As I said, this is a bottoms-up process. It's very difficult.
But you're the majority shareholder, sir.
Agreed. But what are the best combinations? Which combinations will take into account all the integration challenges? Which combinations will provide the most value for all shareholders as well as meet the public purpose? Those are criteria that have to be worked through. But
is it something that you're actively looking at?
Those are aspects that the bank boards themselves, the management in these banks have to really think through. I think anybody who looks at India's public sector banks, the 22 public sector banks that we have right now, recognizes that if they have to be competitive in the future, that they are going to, as Mr. Chidambaram has said, they're going to have to be, very, very globally competitive. Our private sector banks are extraordinary in terms of their efficiency, their effectiveness, their competitiveness, and that's wonderful. And if our public sector banks have to get to that level, they have to think through what is the mechanism. But consolidation is not the only lever when it comes to positioning yourself as far as industry structure is concerned. Consolidation is one lever, but at the same time there are other differentiated strategies. For example, you can be a very strong regional player. Size is not the only competitive lever. There are differentiation levers as well. So you can think about regional strategies. Sure. You can think about fee generating strategies. You can decide that you will compete in certain segments like MSME and you'll be really the number one player there. So there are a host of strategies that you can pursue, and that is precisely what we need the public sector banks to think through. And it's very important that it be a bottoms-up process, because if it's not a bottoms-up process, then the ownership and the accountability is not with the banks. I mean, it would be inappropriate for the Ministry of Finance and North Block to be dictating to the banks what they should do. What we have told them is that you have the license, Shereen. You have the license to think like that. And obviously, when I meet the Finance Minister, Dr. Adhya, the Banking Secretary, when we meet with the banks, we tell them, you are running a world-class bank.
So you would like to see some consolidation.
That again is something that the strategies of these banks will tell us. But certainly, I think just purely as somebody who spent a lifetime looking at strategies and investing in the financial sector, I can tell you that I think consolidation is bound to happen, and not just on the public sector side. There'll be consolidation on the private sector side as well. There may be consolidation as far as NBFCs or microfinance institutions are concerned. When you look around the world and you look at the financial sector, because of the technology imperatives, the scale imperatives, the capital imperatives associated with the financial sector, consolidation is inevitable.